Okay, where we're picking up in chapter 6, if you're following along in the slides, which I don't have up front here, but if you're following along, it would begin at slide 20. Sport leadership. The definition our text gives us is communication in and through sport that influences others' actions and attitudes, thus resulting in fulfillment of shared purpose or need. It is not different, unlike the definition of just leadership without the sport in it. Leadership is basically us, the leader, acting in such a way, behaving in such a way, that he or she is trying to influence the actions of others the way he or she would like them to be. Okay, that's what a leader does. And in sport leadership, it's the same, although it's just within the sport context. A couple other definitions: leadership, communication, control, purposeful transfer of need by which individuals influence a single person, a group, an organization, or a community by using full range of communication abilities and resources. Now, what we come to at this point is leadership style. Think, if you will, about a boss that you had or a coach you had, that their leadership style was pretty obvious, and it may have worked for you but not for others, or maybe the opposite, or maybe it didn't work at all for the team or the group. Sport leadership communication style, relatively enduring set of communicative behavior in which a leader engages.
I think it should come all back up on.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. In which a leader engages when interacting with followers. It contributes to success or failure of any attempt to exert influence. So that leader's behavior, leadership behavior, is going to be a positive or a negative thing. Okay, we'll see if this works for us here today. Probably have to log back in. So give me a second, please. Try it again. coming on here, we're talking about leadership behavior, and there's a lot of literature on leadership, and there's a history of it back even into the 40s. We're mainly looking at the contrast of leadership behavior based on task. In other words, I'm going to be on you, be supervising you, be watching you the whole time, or contrast with this idea of relationship. So here we have just the definitions that we were talking about earlier. Down here, note this bullet here. Note that communication occurs in and through sport. Sport itself can send a message, actually. Any idea how that can happen? How does sport send a message? I mean, unless we're talking, I mean, it has to have somebody doing something in sport. It has to have somebody watching it, doesn't it? How does sport itself send a message? Think about that. I may come back to that and ask you again. Effective leadership occurs when the leader and followers buy into a shared vision. It doesn't help for, let's say you've got a basketball coach who is totally sold on playing man-to-man. And he's a new coach, and this team has been doing zone forever. How does that coach get the rest of the team to buy into the man-to-man concept? What if they never do? How effective are they going to be? I mean, that's just one example. There's a college I worked at years ago at the beginning of my career, small college, Christian school similar to Mount Vernon, not Nazarene, and enrollment was, I don't know, not quite what Mount Vernon is now, so it's pretty small. And the president had this idea of having a new slogan, blank college, a tough little Christian college. What does that say? What's the message there? A tough little Christian college. Well, to me, it jumps out that we're going to stay a little college. He doesn't want to grow. He wants to remain, under 1,000 students, but we're going to be this tough little Christian college. Well, it was not a shared vision. There weren't many that bought into it. And from a leadership standpoint, that was a failure. He did not last too long, as you might guess. Leadership is considered transformational when individual followers are enabled to act as leaders themselves. Have you ever had a coach or a boss or somebody who wanted to do it all him or herself and never thought about enabling others to lead? For example, let's say you have a captain of a team, and what is the captain responsible for doing? Do you ever let that captain do anything? Enabling others to act. That's how you build new leaders. And that's one of the ways you define the term transformational leadership. Styles of sport communication, leadership communication. Well, I said that there are basically two, but they have, in this slide, you'll see it's kind of a tri-model. First of all, task-oriented communication. Like I said, it's close supervision. You're given detailed directions. Do it this way. They may be looking over your shoulder to see if you've done it right. But you know what? Look at the balloon on the right there. They're usually successful in achieving goals. But establishing relationships along the way doesn't happen. Now, why are they effective? Why are they successful? Because they concentrate on task. They stay on task. You know, like for example, you don't have a lot of breaks. Everything is geared towards volume of production and so forth. If you want to relate it to a team, there's no horseplay in the locker room. I mean, everything is serious, that kind of deal. Task-oriented. Then you have interpersonal-oriented communication. Let's use the word relationship to talk about that. That's where, you know, I'm this coach that really wants to get to know you. Tell me about yourself. You know, let's talk about you know, what happened in your life this summer, or you know, how'd you feel about practice today? You know, is there a way that we can, you know, do we need to talk about it and do this differently? I mean, totally opposite, if you will, the task-oriented style. It can be effective, especially if the group is self-motivated. Now, let me give you an example of what I mean. The very first dream team in the Olympics, remember that? I mean, you may have been pretty young, or maybe you just read about it. Oh, what was it, in 92 or 96? 96 maybe. Anyhow, the dream team, you know, for years, the U.S. Olympic team was in basketball was made up of amateurs, but they won straight through until we got into the 80s and some of these other countries started to have good teams. So then somebody decided, look, why don't we send our professionals over there? You know, basketball's our sport. So that's when they sent Jordan and Barkley and Magic Johnson and Larry Bird, all those guys, and they destroyed, you know, the competition. Now, my point is, did that coach, I think it was Krzyzewski maybe that coached them, did that coach have to stay on task to make these guys, you know, these are the plays we're going to run, guys, this is what we have to do, stay on task? No, not really. They're professionals. They know how to play. Now, I'm not saying they, you know, it was real touchy-feely, relationship-oriented necessarily, but it certainly wasn't task-oriented, because they knew what to do, and they were successful. Then we have this third style, which is change-oriented, development-oriented. We can call it team-oriented. It's where you're encouraging, there's creativity, you experiment. It can be a combination of task and relationship. And the key to success is that individuals are encouraged to be creative. So you have not only some task orientation, but also relationship orientation. You got the best of both worlds. Now, can you begin to see that with some teams, only a task-oriented is going to work, or only a relationship, or maybe it's such a mature group that you can use the team-oriented. Here's an example of what I mean. Any of you play youth soccer when you were a little kid? Play soccer? Okay, if you've seen it or played it or know about it, and or not just youth soccer, maybe it's, you know, youth basketball or whatever. That has to be fairly task-oriented, doesn't it? I mean, kids come in, they don't know, you know, I don't know as much about soccer as I do about basketball, but as I think about it, you know, in basketball, they don't know how to dribble, let alone the fact that you can't double dribble. And so a lot of it is on task. Now you may say, yeah, but you can't just keep little kids and make them. No, you can't. But there's a certain amount of instruction within task-oriented coaching and leading. Now, let's see where we go here. All right, the sport leadership quadrant. Basically, I have this same thing up on this board, but I wanted to make a point about it. Here we have, this reflects leadership behavior. These 4 quadrants represent different stages of leadership behavior. And if you go along the x-axis, it means that it's more task-oriented. The farther you go this way, it's more task. Over here, the farther you go up on the y-axis, the more relationship. So how do you define the behavior then? Well, there's a number. Your text has a number of modifying nouns that can be a little confusing, but if you get the basic idea, they shouldn't be too confusing, and we can use these terms that they've given us. Note that a leader, a sport leader who is low in task and low in relationship is what your author calls impoverished. They demonstrate low degrees in both task and relationship. There's little supervision and there's little effort to establish relationships. And the term that we might dub them is laissez-faire. Do what you want. I don't know if you've ever had a coach like that. Probably not very effective. Or a boss like that, let you do what you want. I had a job in college one time, a summer job, working for a dry cleaning company that had a contract to clean drapes in Ohio State University dormitories. So we would go in and pull drapes and load them up. They'd go to the cleaner, they'd bring them back, and we'd install them again. Well, we had a supervisor, an immediate supervisor, who wasn't much older than us. And we were supposed to get to work by about, 6:30 maybe. And we're all just dying. And the supervisor, he was always late. So we just slept till he got there. And that was laissez-faire. He was very low relationship and obviously very low task. And later on, when it was all over, I talked to the owner and he said, I knew what was going on. I could tell by the production. There wasn't a whole lot happening. Okay, well, how about somebody who is really task-oriented, but not so much relationship? The definition we use is authority compliance. They're good supervisors, but they tend to ignore or discount the value of establishing relationships. It's all business. Here's what we need to do to succeed. I don't really care about knowing anything about your life, but because you're here to work. And some people, that's what they like. And it happens with teams, it happens with companies. Goals are met a lot of times, but team members are not necessarily happy. We would call that autocratic. A good example of an autocratic coach, there's many of them, but the one that comes to mind mostly in my mind is Bobby Knight, former coach at Indiana, and then Texas. It escapes me. They're the Red Raiders, Texas Tech, thank you. But Bobby Knight is the last coach to have coached an undefeated college basketball team the entire season. Back in, I think, 75, they won the NCAA championship. They went undefeated the entire, and it's not been done since. But Bobby Knight's way of coaching was in your face, yelling at players, grabbing them by their jerseys, shaking them. And you can look up look him up on Google and see him, picture of him picking up a chair and throwing it across the court. Now this was at like an AAU game or something. But he had results. He's not the winningest coach, but he's like second, third, something like that on the list. He'd be autocratic, very successful, but and there's, you know what, there's a lot of players that went there, good players, and left because they couldn't handle it. When I was still coaching at a small school in Ohio that was in the same conference as Mount Vernon, there was a player that he was Mr. Basketball Indiana, and he went to Indiana, played for Bobby Knight, and he couldn't handle the stress. He could not handle the task-oriented style of behavior. And so he left and transferred to Ryle Grand. And one thing that you find a lot of times is that really, really good players that transfer to smaller schools don't pan out the way they were anticipated to. I've always thought it's not unlike a varsity player who quits the team and starts to play intramurals, and everybody thinks he's going to be a great star, and his play drops down to the level of everybody else. Well, that's what happened to this guy. Let's see here. Okay, let's go up to a leader who's not totally, but very high in the relationship-oriented behavior, but not so much on the task. And your author uses the term country club, participative, communicative style. Maybe that's a better one. Leaders place relationships as the priority. The actual supervision may suffer. The leader wants to be your friend. That's a big mistake. I don't know if any of you are considering teaching, but one of the first things, when I went through teacher education, one of the first things you learn is you are not the friend of your students. Don't expect to make friends. Because you go in there as a new teacher and you're only 4 years older than them. Do you remember having teachers that looked pretty young, that looked like they might not be much older than you? And and a new teacher a lot of times feels like, if I'm not real skilled at teaching, maybe I can make friends with these people. Bad idea. Now I supervised many, many physical education student teachers. And do you remember ever having a student teacher in physical education in high school? I mean, that's an area that's really tough if you go in trying to make friends. Because they'll eat you alive, walk all over. I don't know how many times I've told students, don't try to be their friend, you're their teacher. They try to be more of a buddy. And because of that, they didn't stay on task very good. Now let's move over to the top right quadrant. This is where what we call team-oriented. That's where the leader is both high in task and high in relationship. Now, you have to have a pretty mature group in order for leadership behavior like that to be effective. I would liken that to a team that has all seniors, or mostly seniors, and they've been in the program for 4 years. Or maybe you come from a smaller school system and maybe you play ball with the same guys or girls from 7th grade on. And you've got this relationship. You know what people do. You know how they act. And that kind of a coach the coach that has a team like that can not only establish a relationship because it's already there, but also be task-oriented and keep them on task. And that's, if we're choosing the best, that's obviously the best. But if you walk into a situation, let's say you have opportunity, you want to be a coach. Does anybody here think they might want to coach something at some time? Anybody? Okay. A lot of times the first team that you get to coach is a lower level, lower skilled team than you aspire for. You know, I didn't start out as a college coach. Oh, the first coaching assignment I had, I think, was an assistant high school part-time coaching job in track and field. And I was just there for one season and learned a lot, but where was I going? See, this is what happens when you get old. When you get, here's where we're going. When you are given a team that, you know, look, I want to coach older kids, better kids. Well, what happens? You know, you've got all this information to give out, all these ideas, but they're not ready for it. So here's what you got to do a lot of times. You have to be willing to change, adjust your leadership behavior, and this is how the quadrant is adjusted. It's like this. It goes both directions. So I might start out being assigned a team that doesn't know how to do anything, and they don't know each other, and I've got to do a little bit of both. Let me back up. I've got a team that may know each other, but they got no skills. So I'm not too worried about the relationship, but they sure need to learn the fundamentals. Or I may be given a group that is highly skilled, but they hate each other. I come into there and I gotta, work the relationship. Now, the reason I have arrows on either end is that team may progress or digress. You know, if they start out with low skills, well, then maybe you can kind of come back on the skills a little and work a little on the relationship. Or maybe their skills decline a little over here, and you need to move this way to increase the skill building. Now, not every coach has the ability to turn on a dime and change his or her coaching or leadership behavior. Have you ever heard anybody talk about, well, so-and-so can't coach that team because he or she is fill in the blank? Well, that coach should be able to change his or her leadership behavior. Now, this all fits within this larger umbrella of sport communication. It happens in teaching. You guys are mostly upper class. You've been in sport management classes. Everything I don't have to start from zero and explain sport management to you because you've been hearing that for 2 or 3 years. But so I can zero in on this particular topic. However, if I have a group of freshmen who don't even know what sport management is and they're in my class, I have to start from ground zero and go from there. I have to be able and willing to change my leadership, or in this case, teaching style. How about this? We all got masks on. I can't tell you how much I dislike this. I mean, some of you, I had a class last semester. Others, I've never seen you from the nose down. The only way I know what you look like is to look at a picture. And I feel like we can't get to know each other that well with these masks on. For one thing, I can't hear real well, and so I have to, continue to ask you to repeat things. But I've got to be willing to adjust to that type of teaching. In March last year, all of a sudden, whether you've done online or not, we had to go online. Whether or not you'd taken an online class or whether or not the professor had taught online, we had to change. And boy, what a quick switch. It was like a couple of days notice. Now I had taught online, so it wasn't that tremendous a change, but I had to adjust along the way. Any questions here about leadership behavior? All right, let me switch the slides, and I'm going to stop the video here in a second. Okay, let